Dr. Harcombe, you've spoken in detail about evidence, and you were here when Professor Noakes had given his evidence, and he said you will comment on the levels of evidence. Obviously, you've spoken about systematic reviews, and you've spoken about randomized controlled trials. Can you tell Madam Chair about the various levels of evidence?
Yes, certainly, Dr. Ramdas. There are many different pyramids that one can find in papers looking to assess levels of evidence, but almost every pyramid that you can look at will put systematic reviews and meta-analyses at the top of the pyramid as the highest level of evidence. Now, clearly, as we've seen this morning, there can still be bias and reporting in the abstract that doesn't perhaps reflect the paper in a meta-analysis or systematic review, but that is generally regarded as the highest level of evidence. And systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials is generally regarded as higher than prospective cohort studies. And the pyramid then moves down from that, and randomized controlled trials are then recognized as the next best level of evidence, certainly ahead of observational studies, also called epidemiological studies or prospective cohort studies. And there are different types of prospective cohort studies. And so a pyramid can be established, and there may be some debate as to whether case control studies are better than cross-sectional studies, but generally the pyramid accepts meta-analysis, systematic review at the top, and randomized control trials ahead of epidemiology, and then various other types of studies muddling around somewhere at the bottom of the pyramid.
Now, Dr. Harcombe, with regard to the South African-based dietary guidelines, do you have any comment in respect of the evidence base for it?
Yes, when I heard that the pro forma complainant wished to discuss levels of evidence, particularly with my testimony, and not to address it to Professor Noakes, I had already, of course, looked at the South African dietary guidelines in quite some detail to look at their evidence base in terms of how they drew upon the American ones. But then I particularly went back to look at the strong evidence claimed for in that document. So the 2013 South African Dietary Guidelines are 165 pages long, and there are 4 references only to examples of strong evidence. 2 of those relate to sugar, and although references are not given for the strength of that evidence, I would not seek to disagree with that. I also believe that sugar is not a substance that human beings should be consuming. So I examined the South African Dietary Guidelines for references to strong evidence, and in the 165 pages of the guidelines, there are only 4 references to strong evidence. 2 of them don't have references, but they relate to sugar not being advisable, and I would concur with that, so I have no issue with that. A third was looking at some factors that determine development in infants, and again, there was nothing controversial there. So in the entire 165 pages, the evidence, strong evidence supporting any of the 13 dietary guidelines in the 2013 review seemed to come down to one reference, which was a study of cereal grains, legumes, and diabetes. And it seemed to be comparing whole grains with refined grains and determining that perhaps whole grains were better than refined grains in terms of diabetes. And again, with that, I probably would not disagree. It would have been very interesting to see a comparison of whole grains with real food in the management of diabetes, that real food being naturally low in carbohydrate and high in fat, and that may then have made a significant difference. But essentially, there are 13 guidelines based on one reference that describes itself as strong evidence. So I was not overwhelmed by the strength of the evidence upon which the dietary guidelines of South Africa appear to rely.
And finally, Dr. Harcombe, having looked at the South African-based guidelines and looking at the evidence base for it, was there any evidence for that the low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet may be harmful or potentially dangerous?
I certainly saw none, and the paediatric guidelines I was particularly impressed by. I thought the detail given of the chicken, fish, meat eggs, dairy produce on a regular basis, I thought was excellent advice.